Samurai, and this is my capstone short film project. So where and why I began, in 10th grade I took animation and film 1. I started making stop motion videos for the class that year because of COVID and really enjoyed it. And I've enjoyed watching movies and films my entire life and really enjoy fiction. So for this project, I decided to take my love of fiction and stop motion and create something where I could combine the two to make something that I was very passionate about. So for my inquiry questions, I said, how can I use stop motion animation to create an interesting and fun action story? What kinds of movements are important to telling my story? How can I keep my audience engaged in my story? And how do I incorporate knowledge of Western and samurai movies into my own to help make connections to my audience? So I'm gonna play my film and then talk about the process. So that was my short film. I hope you enjoyed that. So now I'm going to talk about the process. So for this project, I had 4 goals: envision, observe, understand our worlds, stretch and explore, engage and persist, and develop, craft, and reflect. So for envision, for this project, I wanted to create something that I was passionate about and something that other people would enjoy. And I knew from the beginning that I wanted to make a stop motion animation because of the work I'd done on them in the past. I wanted to create my own story and my own characters so I could make something completely original. And I came up with the idea for Cowboy Samurai by combining 2 types of movie genres and characters that I enjoyed. So for my film, I looked to certain forms of media for inspiration and based my characters and stories around those. I then had to decide what other elements I wanted to include so I could make it a true Western film. So for these elements, I drew inspiration from many different forms of media. I researched many different shot types and camera angles that are common in Western films. And I then incorporated them into my film to give it a Western feel while also keeping things original. So one shot that I use that's common in many Western films is the cowboy shot. which is a camera angle where the scene shows a character from the hip up. Here's an example. And these types of shots are frequently used in westerns, mostly because there's lots of like dueling scenes. Here's an example of the cowboy shot where I used it in my film. Another shot I also used a lot of was the wide shot. And shots like these help the audience determine the setting of the film and what is happening around the characters. So here's an example on the left of a wide shot in just a regular movie. You can obviously tell it's happening in some sort of like western setting, and based off the way the characters are spaced, it looks like they're about to like fight. So I took inspiration from that and used shots like these in my film to help the audience see like what's happening. So I also used a shot common in samurai films and media where the character draws their sword before a fight. So here's an example, and then how I used it in mine. These types of shots are very similar to the cowboy shot where the character is being depicted from the hip up. And these types of shots are very common in both samurai and western films because many of the early samurai films were inspired by the western cowboy genre. So on my next goal, stretch and explore and gain and persist. This was mostly the creation process. So for this film, I started out by making a storyboard and developed ideas for how I wanted my film to play out. For this part of the project, I had help from my mentor, who was my brother, who's a huge movie fan, and he took various film classes throughout high school and college. I took his advice on my storyboard and overall writing techniques to try and make the story as interesting as possible. Here you can see pictures of my very first storyboard. After I finished my storyboard, I then started making my characters, and this was an interesting process because I had never really worked this much with clay before and had never made a stop motion with clay. So this was my very first like rough draft of my main character. Doesn't look that great, but I think I did a pretty good job moving from that. So in the early stages of creating my characters, movement was a big problem because they were made entirely out of clay. Their limbs didn't move very well and it was difficult to get the results that I wanted. So because of this issue, I worked with Miss Lavoie, who was my animation and film teacher and an expert in the arts, to come up with a solution to this problem. And our solution was armatures. So basically what an armature is it's like a wire skeleton, and they're used really frequently in stop motion animation films to help the characters with like movements. It makes movement a lot easier, and you just sort of mold the clay around these. So this is my very first character I made with the armatures, and I used him in my film. So after I made him, I then went on to make my very first test animation to see how it would like work. So that was a very first like rough like start to my process, and I think I was able to come a long way from that. So after that, I went on to make the rest of my characters, and I used an armature for all of them except this like big dude, because I wanted his movement to be sort of like awkward and clumsy since he was supposed to be like a big like menacing character. So instead of armatures, I sort of like stuck toothpicks in his arm and then like stuck it into the body so it would like stay. And this was my main character, and I wanted him to be like recognizable to the audience, so I gave him like a cowboy hat and a sword and the like revolver, and I added just a cape to make him look cool. And I wanted to make him stand out from the other characters because they all sort of shared like the same color palette, so I made him just have like different colors. And all his like items that he uses are all just like Lego pieces that I found around my house. So I then went on to create the setting of my film. So for the setting, I wanted to give it a Western feel so it could be recognizable to the viewers. So to achieve this, I made props and a background of a desert, and I made this little like Western like water tower out of popsicle sticks to make it look like wood. And this was the space I had to work with for my project. It was pretty interesting because I had to print out the backgrounds and all like the sand, and I had to stick like tape onto the back and it wouldn't really stay up, so I had to put those like clamps on, and it was interesting trying to film and like not get those in the shots. So for the filming process, I had to be creative for most of my shots. I used a tripod for lots of them, but for the close-ups, I had to detach the camera from the tripod and set it up on the table. So to achieve certain angles, I would prop it up on rolls of tape that I had used for my background so it could stay balanced and the shots would not get messed up. Let's see if you can see this back here. And then moving on to editing, once I was done with filming, and editing this project was definitely a challenge since I had never really edited anything this big in Premiere Pro before. In total, there were over 2,000 pictures that I had taken and uploaded for this project. This was very difficult to work with since it made the process extremely slow and laggy, but with patience, I was able to edit it completely. So I learned a lot from this project, which moves me on to my last goal. Through this project, I was able to learn a lot about animation and filmmaking. I learned how to create armatures and got experience with creating characters out of clay. I gained extensive amounts of knowledge about stop motions and why things like frame rate and steady camera can completely change how a project looks. And I also learned a lot about editing and filming, and these steps taught me a lot about time management because I had to film this and edit it entirely in school because my workspace was in school and I had to edit it on the school computers. So I had to come in during lots of my free periods. And, yeah. So for reflecting, this project was pretty difficult, but it was also a very rewarding process. In my time spent on this project, I learned many new things about stop motion and myself. I realized that through hard work and perseverance, I was able to create something I was proud of, and something that was not just enjoyable for me, but hopefully for others as well. And I hope to possibly create more films like this in the future with the knowledge and experience I've gained from this project. I received a lot of support for this project. Miss Lavoie gave me a lot of help. She helped me with the armatures for filming and taught me how to do certain things with editing. My brother helped me with my storyboards. I got a lot of help from friends. I showed them the rough footage for my project and they gave me constructive feedback and helped me film some of my scenes. I also got help from my parents. So future impact, in the future, I'm hoping to create more films like this and expand my learning experience. I want to continue to make things that people will enjoy. And I hope that this project has inspired some of you to explore the world of animation and maybe create something of your own.